What is up, guys? Welcome to the Meeting Up Podcast. I'm Andres.
This is RB3.
I'm Sabrina.
And joining us today, we have the spider himself, Mr. Robert Parker, in the house. What is up, man?
Hello. Thank you guys so much for having me. This is like crazy exciting for me. I listen to you guys all the time, so I'm pretty pumped for this.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, man. And obviously, we had to have you on. And if we're going to have you on, we're going to be talking about the franchise that RB3 and I know the least about, and Sabrina just saw for the first time, and that is the Lord of the Rings franchise. You're going to walk us through it. You're going to tell us what it's all about. You have the poster in the back of The Hobbit, so...
Dude, it's sitting over there.
Yep. Eventually, I'll see those movies.
You know...
Those Hobbit movies.
You do you.
Yeah. But either way, man, thank you for coming on. How are you feeling during this quarantine? That's the first thing I got to ask you.
Yeah, man, it's a little nuts. Like, the last couple months have just kind of been a spiral, and they've been that for everybody. So, I'm definitely taking solitude and, all kinds of movies. I probably rewatched this trilogy more times than I would like to admit since quarantine has started. But, whatever it takes to get through it, right?
Absolutely, man, for sure. All right, I'm going to go around the table. RB3, what is your connection to Lord of the Rings?
Well, my connection to Lord of the Rings is just as a basic fan of the franchise. Unfortunately, I'm not really as familiar with the exact particulars of the mythology or all of the different elements that it incorporates. I've just always appreciated these movies on the level of just pure filmmaking. I watched this trilogy when I was younger, just starting to get into film, right after I had started getting interested. I tell the story before on the podcast. I watched James Cameron's Avatar, and that's what really inspired me to become a filmmaker and look into filmmaking. And then around that same time, I had looked into the Lord of the Rings movies and found them and really enjoyed them and loved them. And I admire him for the cinematography. I admire him for the technical aspects, for the visual effects, for the excellent direction by Peter Jackson. Beyond that, I don't know what much I'll have to contribute on when it comes to character names or particulars on specific events and whatnot. I'm just I'm really just more of a casual Lord of the Rings fan, but I am a fan, and I do think they're really, really great. It's a really, really great trilogy of movies.
Yeah, I'll kind of switch up the question a little bit for you, Sabrina. We know that you just saw the movies, as I just spoiled for everyone. What is your connection to the fantasy genre? Do you have any interest in fantasy? Are you kind of non-fantasy vibes or
It
what?
definitely depends on the type of film. This was never really my cup of tea, so I've actually just never seen it in my adult life, but I did watch it when I was really, really little, and I just remember Smeagol and Gollum scaring me so badly. My cousin used to do the voice, he had a poster in his room, and when we would stay at his house, me and my sister would sleep in his room, and him and his brother would sleep in his brother's room, so the poster was up on the wall, and I swear it was watching me when I was sleeping. So that's kind of what I remember from my childhood, and I have seen it, when I was rewatching it over this past week, I got flashbacks to being at my cousin's house and watching these with him because he was such a big fan. But literally since I was 7, I hadn't seen it since. So this was really cool, kind of completely revisiting it with fresh eyes, because even though I remembered some parts and Orlando Bloom and things like that, nothing stayed. I didn't retain any of that knowledge when I was a kid. So this was basically the first time I was ever watching it, and I really, really enjoyed it. I binge watched it a lot of hours, so that's how it has to be entertaining and it has to be something good for you to actually sitting down for, oh god, I think it was 9-10 hours.
Yeah.
For all of these films, and I really did have a good time, so I enjoyed it.
All right, Robert Parker, you heard Smeagol. Give us your best Smeagol, man. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, I would, but I don't want to scare Sabrina off the show or anything.
Exactly. Flashback memories of horror stories.
Seriously.
Exactly, yeah.
What is your connection to it, man? Obviously, your introduction, what your first time watching it, all that stuff.
Yeah, so I saw the movies way before I read the books, and I've read the books, but I definitely have a bigger connection to the movies. One of my uncles, who was kind of the person that I credit for like being really the first person to like really get me into watching movies, get me into films. He showed me Star Wars for the first time, showed me Lord of the Rings for the first time, like very influential like movie fan on my life. So he showed me these movies. I was a little young when they came out in theaters, so I wasn't able to watch them as they came out. But a couple years later, he just like sat me down one weekend. Like I went over to his house and we just like watched all three of them over like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, one each, and just fell in love with the world, the storytelling, the great characters, like just everything about it. It continues to be my favorite film series. Continues to be like one of the most influential on just me as a film goer, just me as like a person in general. So yeah, I have a very deep connection to the movies especially, but really just the world and the story as a whole.
How about the fantasy genre? Are you do you have a connection to that as well, or no?
Yeah, fantasy's always been my favorite genre of movie, and I think a lot of that I credit with like reading Harry Potter a lot when I was a kid, and then watching Lord of the Rings a lot when I was a kid. Like those two things combined, really made me just love all kinds of fantasy, whether it be like movies, books, shows. That's always the genre that I gravitate towards the most for just storytelling in general.
What's your second favorite like fantasy type story or book or
Sure.
movie or show?
Probably I love Harry Potter quite a bit, and I like most of Game of Thrones quite a lot too. I think Game of Thrones did a really good job as far as like what, in my opinion, the most important part of like fantasy storytelling is not just creating the world, not just having a good story, but really having characters that feel lived in, that feel real, because it is in, sort of this big, uh, you know, big scoped world. But if you have characters that are really relatable and really lived in, I think that's the most important part. And I think that's what Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, I think that's what all of those things do so well, is you have those just really well written, really great characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I'm very partial to Game of Thrones. For
Yeah.
anyone who doesn't know, shout out to Casterly
Have
Talk,
to talk, yeah.
our short-lived Game of Thrones podcast I had with Lon, Rachel, and Ken. Three like nerd legends right there. I'm telling you, you have never reached nerd level when you sit down with Rachel, Lon, and Ken to talk Game of Thrones, and that's what we did. And I remember, I think I told you, RB3 and Sabrina, that when I did my first episode, I was like, oh damn, this is real. Like if we start playing D&D right now, it's like it's on. Like this is real. Like these guys are hardcore. They've lived in it. They're all older than me.
Yeah.
Way nerdier. Like that. I loved it. I think it was a lot of fun. And obviously I'm very partial to that kind of fantasy style genre. But one of the most important aspects of fantasy is the history, right? I don't know if you can
Right.
attest to this, but it's that idea of this world that is so lived in that references to the past, you can almost visualize it yourself as an audience or as a reader. You imagine like this journey that Bilbo went on, and when you first see the Fellowship of the Ring and all that kind of stuff that is very Game of Thrones as well, with the doom of Valyria and all that kind of stuff that Daenerys mentions. But that's part of the joy and part of the world that you want to stay in there because you want to soak in all the information that you possibly can. Talk to me about that, Sabrina, when you were watching these movies and you felt like, oh, this is a crazy history that's been going on forever in Middle Earth.
Yeah, it was one of the coolest things, I think, just like going throughout the three films was trying to piece together when they talk about a certain character and then that character ends up on screen and just following all of that. And it is such rich storytelling. And it's actually pretty accessible. Like, I know it's probably not the most ideal thing for somebody to binge watch it all at once like I did for the first time. But if you take your time and you go through this, it actually is easy to absorb, even though it's so much information coming from the background, coming from other characters, talking about lineage, talking about who's related to who and what positions they're in, whether they're king or everything like that. But it really was just genuinely rich storytelling, rich world building, and just interesting. I felt like I just wanted to learn more as I was watching it, and that's what kept me going when I was binging all three of these films. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Robert, talk to me a little bit about how JRR does world building. It's JRR, right?
Yeah.
Tolkien?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
how Tolkien does world building. Because I feel like world building, RB3 and I have been talking about this for years, is one of the most important aspects of creating genre filmmaking. And obviously, I take a lot of it from anime. Obviously, you see my Attack on Titan there. But that's kind of my mentality of world building, is establishing that history and creating mystery around past characters that you haven't seen on screen. But how does Tolkien do it?
So, as far as Tolkien himself, he wrote The Hobbit first. The Hobbit came out first. It was a children's book. It was extremely popular when it came out. He started as like a story to his son, I believe, and then his publisher was like, "Hey, let's actually make that a book." And then after the success of The Hobbit, his publisher was like, "Okay, what happens next? Let's crank out some more, right?" And that's when Lord of the Rings came to be, and it was the story of Frodo and his adventures and kind of everything that came after. The way that it's done in the movies really is just with such attention to detail with the production design specifically. Like every single creature, whether it's practical effects or visual effects, like it looks so realistic. It looks so, like you said, sort of like history. It looks like, you're obviously in a fantasy world that's completely made up, but it looks like you're watching a documentary at sometimes. Like all of the production design was taken so seriously. All of the weapons, the armor, they like physically made all of that. It's not CG. As far as Tolkien himself, it really did come with the characters and also the locations. He made sure to put a lot of detail about the locations. Yes, the movies are dense. The books are way denser, which is why I don't revisit them quite as often as I do with the movies. But he made sure that, Gondor has a very specific feel to it versus the Shire, and also not just like the descriptions of those locations, but also kind of the themes that those locations represent and sort of the symbolism. Like the Shire is very agrarian. It's very like, it's supposed to be this great homely thing, this just pure joy and warmth and happiness, versus a place like Mordor, which obviously has a lot of different themes attached to it. So he definitely made sure to really emphasize the themes of each area, as well as the characters that represent those areas as well.
Yeah, and I kind of want to jump to that too, specifically going to the groups of people, or the type of people, or the species, whatever the term is correctly for the Middle Earth world. But I'm going to toss it to you, RB3. When it comes to that, the idea of humans, of elves, of orcs, of ents, all these different types and subgroups of people, and hobbits, for example, and what they represent in a real world type basis. What was your takeaway from that, RB3?
Well, I think, and I think it's a further extension of like the world building. The world building that Tolkien was doing was based off of a lot of the real world, right? Like a lot of the world that he was seeing. I remember Tolkien was a guy who fought in World War One, who wrote these books during the beginnings of World War Two. So he saw himself in a society where I'm sure as a younger kid, before pre-World War One, there was a much more of like an optimistic kind of feel to like the world in general. But then, post the war and then seeing World War II kind of rear its ugly head back into it, I think that plays into the overall theme of the Lord of the Rings movies, which is like the corruption of power, right? How corrupting power could be. So then I think he incorporates that into making the Lord of the Rings feel very nostalgic, going back to like the Shire having that kind of warm, kind of homey kind of vibe. It's because it's supposed to feel nostalgic because it's like a place of safety. It's the place of beginning. And then using that like baseline, the further we go into the story, the more descent we get into like the darkness and the madness of like the world and the corruption and the evil and whatnot. So then I think that to me is why the world feels so real, because it's inspired so much by real life. And I think going to, when you talk about like the different species and not species necessarily, but different races and characters in this, again, that's another extension of what's really happening in the real world, right? Like the identity of globalization, the world expanding, this intersection of races and this like beginning of a boiling a pot, I think that's something that Tolkien was kind of playing with and experimenting with too. So again, I think these are all prevalent themes that run throughout the series. And I think that's why it feels very timeless, because it resembles a time that's so familiar, and it resembles a fact of like history that just keeps repeating itself. The whole idea of war and the descent to war and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, Sabrina, you saw these movies now. what group of people would you categorize yourself in now that you see
Ooh.
their culture, their style, their vibe? What are you? Are you a hobbit? Are you an orc? Are you an ent?
I honestly, out of all of the groups, I really did enjoy all of the hobbits. Those characters, I just thought they had so much heart and so much joy, and they were so courageous and brave, and like I was just constantly rooting for them. The
Yeah.
two, Merry and Pippin, they're like just like adorable little side quests like throughout this entire trilogy, and it was so cute. I loved it. And it really, even like Samwise Gamgee and Frodo, how courageous they are to go on the missions that they do, and Samwise constantly being by Frodo's side
Yeah.
throughout all of this and being there for him even with all this danger that's impending. Like that's how I see me and my group of friends. That's how I
So
see
you're a
us.
hobbit?
So I'm a hobbit. We're
Yeah.
hobbits. Well,
You
you guys can
chilling?
identify as something else, but I'm a hobbit.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like each group, Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, has
Yeah,
their own
absolutely.
like theme, their own style, their own culture as far as what they represent. Can you walk
Yeah,
me through them real quick? You don't have to go through every single one, but maybe
yeah.
just like the major, the
So
elf, the man,
the
the
Hobbits are
hobbit,
definitely like we've already
the
touched on them. It's
dwarves.
very RB3 nailed it on the head. It's nostalgic, right? Every single step of the way that the four Hobbits are on along their journey, they're like, man, I just want to go back, or like, this is why we're doing this. We're doing it to save our home because it's worth saving. It's just all good. It's all homey, and that's kind of it comes into play with like some of the music and like all this kind of stuff too, is those hobbits really are just true. It's just about like homeliness. They go back at the end of Return of the King back to the Shire, and nothing has changed there. They don't know anything about the outside world. They just know their farms and their bars and just like being friendly, like, and that's definitely the hobbits. That's just a theme of joy and just like frivolity and all those kind of things. And then when you like as you move in the movies, you get introduced to more like the elves and the dwarves obviously constantly butt heads. Like the elves are very ancient and sort of like celestial and very wise and all these things, and the dwarves are super stubborn and they drink a lot and they're very just bullheaded and all those kind of things. And you can tell that there's a lot of history between these two races. And then when you get to the humans, I think that's where the themes of Lord of the Rings, the thematic storytelling, is at its best. When you get into Two Towers and Return of the King, once the humans come in, because like RB3 said, it was definitely written with the influence of a soldier on World War One, who saw some of the horrors of war and saw like what humans are capable of. But there's also like, even with the flawed human characters, the most complex human characters, people like Boromir and Theoden and Denethor and Faramir, like the really complicated characters, there's still hope, like in the world of men. As weird, like in a fantasy way, that's kind of how they spin it. But like, as much corruption and as much hatred and as much recklessness and as much power hungry and greed that there is in humans, they're still good. They still have honor. They still have like good values deep down, and that's like a really inspirational thing. So as far as humans, they're definitely the most complex, and they go into the most different types of themes, and you just see it reflected with all these different characters, right? Like Boromir's a super complex character. He's just so burdened by like the pressure that his family and his people and himself that he puts on himself, really, and that's relatable. Like we all put pressure on ourselves to like do certain things, and sometimes we succumb to it and have dark moments, and sometimes we take that and turn it into a good thing and like end honorably. Like that is just such a relatable arc. And again, with the whole great character thing, like that's just again why it's just such great storytelling, is each character has such a fully lived in arc from beginning to end of the entire trilogy. Every single character changes just enough to where you can sit there and you can walk through everything that made them who they were at the end. And I think that is really telling of not only great like races and great like lived in world building, but also just great writing, not just by Tolkien, but also by the people who adapted it, the three screenwriters as well.
Yeah, and to kind of finish up on
Yeah.
there, if you were to pick one or
I
categorize
mean,
yourself
I
in
would
one,
love to go live in
which
a
one would
hobbit
you
hole
be?
for the rest of my life. I would love to do that so much. But I don't want to steal Sabrina's answer. So with that, I'll actually say the Ents. They're sort of like they're not as dug into as far as themes. Like their
Nice.
biggest theme is one that Tolkien was actually really behind, and that's like very environmentalism. There's like very clear environmentalist tones when
Hmm.
Treebeard is just walking through the forest and be like, "Oh man, Saruman used to care about the woods. Somebody with that much power should know better." Like those are just like a couple nitpick quotes from him. And I think that that is a really great undertone, especially of Two Towers, where he's just like, people in power have the choice of what to do with that power. And I think that is a theme that's explored very, very well in the trilogy, but especially through the storyline of the Ents with Saruman.
I love that choice, man. Absolutely. RB3. I'm gonna throw a little, I don't know, something in the a wrench into something in this whole conversation by asking you about the idea of a movie that came out, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago, 3 years ago, in December, and that is a Will Smith movie called Bright. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because the concept was very. It's an interesting concept, right? What happens if this kind of world is happening now in 2019 or 2020 or whatever the movie came out?
Yeah, it's like if Lord of the Rings meets like Training Day or something like that.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
also like, if all this history is in modern, today version,
Right.
this movie got a lot of pushback because it related the species of the Lord of the Rings to different minority groups, right? So that's why a lot of people were taken aback by that. What are your thoughts on that, and what are your thoughts on the idea of relating? Because I think there was even a, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but there was even a Robert Parker. If there was, I know there's two Roberts. There was a controversy behind the casting of the elves in the upcoming Amazon Lord of the Rings. That some people were like, they better not cast a black
Yeah.
person or something like that. There was a controversy behind that, so that's why I want to toss it to you, RB3, because even now, some Lord of the Rings fans were kind of vocal about the idea of the purification of these races, like the elves and like the orcs or like man.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, again, I'm not speaking for J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm not familiar enough with his worldview or his personal opinions on things to know where he stands like firmly. But I mean, just from observing the text of the movies and of being an outside observer of the books, I think the racial metaphor is there. I mean, I think that is clear that that different
Yeah.
species or different creatures are supposed to embody different branches of society. Now, now when we think about society and when we think about class and we think about wealth, that is kind of intrinsically connected to race in a lot of ways. But now I think, I don't know in the particulars of what the Amazon controversy is, but I imagine that, the idea of having these all super white elves. I mean, we kind of were laughing at it last night in the group chat, like
Yeah.
how white the
Yeah.
how white the homies are. You know what I mean? Like it's literally, I mean, they literally reflecting off of them. That's how white they are. So it's like it's supposed to be a clear and obvious thing of like, yeah, like that's supposed to be white, pure, clear, whatever. I guess if they want to switch up the metaphor from being like specifically about race and specifically about color to being more of a societal commentary of elites or elitism versus lower class, again that can be something that they want to do. But that's not to say that I'm sure in the writings of Tolkien that was probably his ideal too. But subconsciously, there's always that idea of like whiteness, pureness, like all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, if it's intentional, it was intentional, and that's what it should be, I guess. But if it's not intentional, I'm sure it's because of that's just how his mindset and like the world's mindset was like during that time. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a tricky subject. I don't know.
Yeah, what do you think, Robert, about all this, especially about the Amazon show and the idea of races being
Yeah.
identified
Yeah,
with
it's interesting. I
these
don't
fictional
remember
races?
exactly what went on with the Amazon controversy. I think there were just people who, are very passionate about sort of like that look of, especially the elves. Like, they wanted them to be very ethereal
Yeah,
and like
preserving.
very, look very ancient and wise while also looking very like quaint. And I think, but that can be achieved through any kind of filmmaking. Like no matter what actor you cast in that role, like that can be achieved through the production design, through
Yeah.
the writing. So I don't know exactly what happened with that. As far as like there being themes of racism sort of in the story, definitely it's there for sure. I don't know if it's exactly like racism in the way that we sort of see it in 2020, but like there you can't say that there isn't themes of that. It's obviously between it's not based on color, it's between like literally races of people, but it's definitely there, and it's also a theme that's like explored.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the movies, they're not like, oh man, we beat elf dwarf racism, like it's over now, but you definitely saw like it develop, like a friendship between two people who shouldn't like each other. We saw that develop, and it wasn't like, one person like saved the other one and suddenly they're best buds. Like it was again with like the runtime, it took its time. It takes its time to develop these themes, take its time to develop these characters, these friendships. So those themes are definitely there, and I do think the elitism and the classism, I think that is a little bit more prevalent than sort of like a minority group racism issue, but it's certainly there. All art is subjective. It belongs to the people who consume it and who like derive themes from it. So anybody can watch it and think that a different theme is there versus another person. I think what's great about Lord of the Rings is it does do such a great job of tackling such a wide spectrum of themes and doing them all justice and doing it all so well. I think that's one of the things that, as far as from a thematic standpoint, that is just so impressive to do, even given the runtime, and still also telling a great story in like such a great way.
Yeah, and it's the reason why I bring it up is because we always try to
Absolutely.
highlight the importance of diversity, and if I'm being honest, it's always this interesting idea of like whether it's the history of film or the history of old books. You start to realize there's this running through line of like your general white hero savior saving his people, and you see that through characters like Luke in Lord of the Rings, and you start to say, wait a minute, have you noticed that the main group is usually not a person of color?
Yeah.
And when you start to see that, that's when you start to want the change of saying, hey, let's have a black Jedi be in charge of the Jedi Council, which is why we got Mace Windu and why we got other women of color inside the council, even though it was minor characters. But that's what it changed was Star Wars, obviously. But even nowadays, with fantasy storytelling, there is still a very current controversy with the casting of certain types of characters, a la Game of Thrones, which is always going to be the kind of idea of like, well, these are the first men and the Andals, and they have to be, all white dudes, and the only black
like
dudes are
Dorne,
pirates, or
that's
slaves,
complicated,
literally slaves. But
Yeah.
at the same time, you get Dorne and you get me, which is I've openly talked about the power of Pedro Pascal's character of Oberyn Martell being a prince, literally the strongest fighter in all of Westeros, one of the smartest people of all of Westeros. Like, he's the most capable of the most capable, and he happens to be a Latino guy. Even though it's a fake fictional race, I get it. But at the same time, that meant a lot to me, even though I'm still salty about the conclusion of that, obviously. Because he was a clearly Latin guy. Like, this guy was not hiding how Latino he was. Like, this guy is just super Latino. Right. So what are your thoughts on that, Sabrina, and the idea of any Lord of the Rings stories going forward, like the Amazon Prime show, going out of their way to hire people of color to play these traditional white roles?
Yeah, it kind of boils down to everything that we talk about this topic, is where go for talent. Go for the people who are going to play your character on screen well, because why go out of your way to just narrow it down to like, oh, we need a white actor to play an elf because they have to be that ethereal. I get that Orlando Bloom has like this pale skin and this like
Homeboy's
white hair, but you can still, just like Robert Parker said earlier, you can still portray that onto screen 100%. And even if you still wanted to do white hair and things like that, we get that with characters like Storm. It doesn't mean that you can't kind of mold a certain actor into the character that you want to if they're the ones that are fit to play the role and if they're talented to do it. Like, I do believe that going forward, this is something that should totally be done just because it narrows down the talent you're looking for. Like, I think Liv Tyler, for example, is like a decent actress, but
It's the most
she wasn't like,
miscast role.
it's not like we need to have
absolutely.
Liv Tyler in this role. Like,
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
yeah,
Absolutely right.
like, I'm not trying. Yeah, I was trying to go down that lightly. But that's the thing, because
I
I'm
don't want
like,
to close my eyes. I don't want to fall
Yeah.
asleep.
don't want to fall. I was thinking that when
That's
she
a-
came
I
on
wanna get a
screen for the
reference
first
to you
time.
guys.
Yeah,
I
no,
think
that
I
was so
froze,
funny.
by the way.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Uh-oh, we're
I'm
frozen?
still here.
Oh,
oh
he's back.
no.
Oh, now
Hey,
you're
we're
frozen.
good. We're back.
Okay,
All right,
All
now
good?
you're good.
Everyone's all good?
We're good. We're good.
Hey,
we're back.
but
fine.
that's the point of basically what I'm trying to say is that, like, it's not like she needed to be in this role. I want people to play the roles that it's like,
Yeah.
this actor needs to do it. I don't care about the prerequisites. I don't care about what other people say. Especially, it's a vocal minority, I'm assuming. I don't know too much of the Amazon show, but I'm assuming that it's just a very vocal minority, and a general audience is actually not gonna care at all. So if somebody is good enough to play a role, please cast them. I don't care about wanting to pick like the fairest skin.
Yeah, my thing would be this: if they go out of their way and they want to make it a racial theme and a racial metaphor, and they want to portray it as like, oh yeah, like these elves are all white for a purpose, for like reason for the story, then yes, absolutely do it all white if that's what you're planning on having your theme, if you're planning on making that explicit. But if that's irrelevant, and if that's not what the story you're telling, if the story you're telling is more about society and elitism and class and inequality, then go with people of all skin, skin colors or whatever too. But if they want to do they just can't have their cake and eat it too. Like if they want to do some sort of racial metaphor, but then also want to cast like two black guys just as random elves, it wouldn't make that much sense. And that's why I think Bright, going back to Bright that you mentioned, I think that's where Bright kind of falls apart, because it tries to do this whole metaphor thing, but it kind of makes like zero sense, and it uses stereotypes and tropes instead of like actual like identities. So
Well, my conclusion is when I go back to my knowledge of, I know I'm sorry about this, guys, but vampire mythology, but it's that idea of like this Eastern European super white kind of style, and other vampire stories that I've seen, aka Blade, not really Underworld, but Blade, the
Twilight.
originals, Twilight, Vampire Diaries, go out of their way to say, we need to hire a black actor to be a vampire.
True Blood.
To mix it in, to mix it up, to show that we're not saying that all vampires are white. And it's kind of important to do that if you want to get away from that metaphor, RB3, like you said. Or do you want to say all vampires are white to symbolize this upper class, super white society that's been dominating history under the shadows for years.
And sucking the blood out of people.
And sucking the blood out of people, yeah. But it depends what you want to say. But as a vampire fan, I've always appreciated that they said, we need a black vampire, we need a brown vampire, we need an Asian vampire to show that we can be vampires too, if we want to be. As a kid, I'm just like, I want to be a vampire, so I want to see a brown vampire. But that's just me, right? I think that's important. Alrighty, guys. I think we're going to jump to break, and we're going to get through the movies. Obviously, we spent a lot of time on themes and on conversations around Tolkien, but after the break, we're going to be talking about the actual films, which is what you guys were hoping for. But make sure you guys stick around.
This ain't funny, so don't you dare laugh. With the 4/5 divide you in half. You getting at me equals a bloodbath. You do the math, take you out the equation. This ain't funny, so don't you dare.
Check out our review of the new Netflix movie The Old Guard, available exclusively on First Cut. Enjoy. And there's an element to this movie which I don't know. I didn't watch the trailers. I don't know what Netflix revealed or what they didn't reveal. But there's an aspect to this movie that kind of happens at that point that you mentioned where I was like, oh, they went that direction? Oh, this is totally something different than just a normal action movie. It's like something totally different. And
because it starts out so grounded.
Yeah. You really think it's another one like Extraction or like basically a generic Netflix action movie, but then something happens in the first 15, 20 minutes and you're just like, oh, this is totally different than I thought it was going to be.
I think we should say it just because I feel like the conversation would stop now if we don't say it.
Yeah.
But as soon as they brought in the immortality approach of it all, you guys have no idea how in I was. Like, I was so in, I just kept going down. Like, I was deep in it because that is my speciality, to quote my boy Obi-Wan Kenobi. Because I'm a vampire expert.
Check out our new website on geeksofcolor.co/first-cut to check out our reviews, our videos, and articles that pertain to everything First Cut related. Check it out.
Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What is up, guys? We're back talking about Lord of the Rings. We're finally going to get to the films, but before we do, we got the two, I believe you guys both chose Hobbits. No, you picked Ents. So RB3, we got to get yours. What is your group of people, man? Where's your people at?
I mean, I just identify with the orcs, man. You know what I mean? Ugly lives matter. You know what I mean? You got to go out there. You got to go out there, break that iron, make that steel. Oof. Boom.
Hey, bro.
That's me. So that's me. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, that's wild. I did not see that coming.
Yeah.
Obviously, I would go to man. Yeah.
Wow.
So yourself, basically.
Good one.
Yeah.
It's because I'm selfish and I want power.
There you go. Hey.
So
Very creative.
Yeah.
Alrighty, let's start with
Out of the box.
with Frodo and the Fellowship of the Ring. Do you feel like this follows the classic hero's journey, Robert? Or do you feel like it's a little different from the usual?
I think it's a little bit different because, like, you know, he doesn't really end being this great hero. Like his fall, you know, his big downfall happens like at the very, very, very end when he like just can't do it. So I think it differs a little bit, especially like. It's hard to take just one movie because they really are like one overarching story. Yeah, it is really hard to just say, well, in this movie does he follow this journey? You know, because it is just a continuing arc.
Yeah,
I would
you
say
in all three? I mean,
I think Aragorn has a much. I think he has a more traditional hero's journey than Frodo does, because he doesn't start off as this stereotypical like farm boy type person, but he definitely denies like what he's meant to be, and then he does rise to the occasion to finally like become this great hero towards the end of the third one. So I think he is more aligned with like your traditional hero, even though Frodo I would say is the main character.
Sabrina, what do you think the purpose was to choose the Hobbits as the one to go on this journey instead of the elves or the man? Specifically Frodo and Sam being the ones to go on this incredible journey.
Well, I feel like literally and figuratively, like they're like the little man. They're kind of separated from everything. It's shown, and it's so obvious even when they come back at the end of the third film. And as Robert Parker said before, I mean, they're like nothing has changed. They went on this like crazy, dangerous journey, completely life-threatening, and it's just nothing. It's just back to the normal homey stuff that they're used to. So I think they're just a little man. They're kind of like the odd ones out. So I think it's more profound to have them have to do this journey rather than the already brave, everybody who's already going out and fighting for themselves and fighting for their people and fighting for what's right. And I think that's something that's really interesting when we think about like good versus evil, which is literally just basically the entire time in this. It's like, okay, this is good, this is evil. Some people are this wishy-washy in between, and they either end still being evil or they end actually becoming a good person. But for the Hobbits, none of them are that evil. we see a little bit of that even in almost everybody, not like the elves or anything, but they're just genuinely the odd ones out of all of this, and then they're the ones that kind of go on this huge journey. So I think that's kind of profound.
And Christopher Lee, as the two old guys going at it. That's my definition. It's the two old guys. You need those old guys to fight.
Yeah, got to.
But what do you feel like they represent throughout the entire trilogy, and why they're both on different sides?
Well, I think, it goes back to that great storytelling arc that I've talked about on the show before, like, that we see in Hamilton and all this stuff. Is just a war of ideologies, right? Like a difference in how to construct the world, a difference in how to make the world better. You have somebody as peaceful as Gandalf who just believes in peace and sanctity and just chilling as like pretty much his life philosophy. And you have somebody like Christopher Lee's character. I don't want to say his name wrong here, so if somebody want to Saruman, there you go. Yeah. And Saruman.
He's like Cermanio. Yeah, Cermanio.
Yeah. I could have said anything there. I could have said like Dave.
I would have believed it. But it's something like Saruman who believes, and more of like, and again, I think this is another parallel to like real life, more of like an imperialistic kind of approach to like to the world, like a dominating kind of one leader ruling this kind of super powerful thing. So it goes down to just the difference of that. And it's also about the influence of the ring too, right? Like how one character is kind of crafted and molded by like his belief in the ring and his treasure of the ring, and Gandalf is much more worryful of it, much more like fearful of it. So it's just it's just that dichotomy of ideologies that make for a really compelling facing off against each other.
Robert Parker, a character that is pretty well memorable for a lot of reasons, obviously because of the great Andy Serkis and motion capture. But Gollum represents quite a bit. What do you think is the purpose of a character like Gollum inside this story?
Yeah, so Gollum's my favorite character in the series. Yeah, because I think he's the most complex non-human character. When it does come to some of the themes, like humans, you have Boromir and Theoden, like some other really complex characters. But when you see the duality of Gollum and Smeagol, they really are different characters. Not only in like the way it's shot, where it kind of cuts back, one's on this third, one's on this third, where they're sort of talking to each other, but the performance of Andy Serkis really brings out that they are two separate characters. You see just the facial structure change of the character as he switches between the two, and that dichotomy, that duality, is just so interesting. It, in the context of the story, the ring sort of basically dominated the creature that was Smeagol and turned him into Gollum, which is just this raw basis of a creature that only cares about one thing, doesn't need those other hierarchy of needs, doesn't need all that, is just consumed by his desire. And I think that's a character that's really interested in it. It's very interesting to explore that character, one that is just solely driven on need and greed and desire, and like that keeps him alive literally for hundreds and hundreds of years. His desire keeps him alive, versus Smeagol, who is this sort of more docile, less aggressive, more friendly creature. So those two characters, seeing how they both interact with Frodo and Sam, like Frodo a lot of times is interacting with Smeagol while Sam is interacting with Gollum, and just seeing how, not just how these actors play off each other, not just how the writing works, but just in the context of the story, seeing really these two characters, Smeagol and Gollum, fighting each other for control over the same body. I think that is just one of the most fascinating things to watch on screen.
Yeah, I'll follow up with you, Sabrina. Watching these movies now that you have gotten a chance, obviously you're not as scarred as you was when you were a little kid. But the character, seeing that performance and seeing the duality of this character, what was your takeaway from that?
There was so much, because I actually echo a lot of what Robert said about Smeagol ended up being one of my favorite parts of the entire trilogy. Every time he was on screen, even just honestly going down to like the CG work and the motion capture and everything, that the opening to the third film when it's his descent from when he finds the ring and he goes through that descent, that is an incredible sequence. And I mean, like, the way it holds up coming out in 2000, the way it holds up today, still flawless. And just, Andy Serkis puts his all into everything. My friend made a joke. It was like, Eagle walked so like Caesar could run, for like Andy Serkis, because like starting out with this one, and it really is something interesting. But that one as well. But I mean, this one is absolutely flawless. I'm actually a fan of Jar Jar Binks. All right, I'm a defender. But this one, it's genuinely so interesting, because when I looked back on when I watched it as a kid, I saw him as this like super sinister character, but it's more of like he's just a broken, he is just taken over by that desire, and it's something that's really interesting to look at as an adult now and see that. And again, everything I said from the CG. Whew.
As one real quick more thing to add about the Smeagol thing is, like, as an audience member, you're also seeing him through the eyes of the characters. Frodo is obsessed with Smeagol because he sees himself in that character, right? He sees that this is somebody who was driven by this desire, who was driven insane, literally, by desire for the ring that I'm now carrying. I have to, there's a scene where him and Sam argue, and Frodo goes, I have to believe that he can be saved, because if I don't believe that there's still good in him, how will I ever survive this? So, like, just at a very basic level, for Frodo's character's motivation for why he is so sympathetic to Smeagol's struggle is because he sees himself in that. And I as the audience member, you also kind of have to see yourself. You see Gollum, how Sam sees Smeagol, which is very sinister, like you were saying. You see him plotting, you see that he's about to backstab, right? So as an audience member, you see it from Sam's perspective, but you also have to understand the reasons that Frodo cares so much for this character as well.
Absolutely. Obviously, we're going to go quickly through the other movies. I want to focus on something that's probably not as meaningful, but it is meaningful in a film sense, and that is the battle sequences throughout all three films. Obviously, the last one is the one people kind of cater towards the most. But RB3, on a cinematic level, talk to me about the impact that these battle sequences had on Hollywood in general.
Yeah, I think that these battle sequences are iconic. I personally, I went to USC and film school, and they showed many of the battles in film school classes. The Battle of Helm's Deep is a big example. But yeah, I think these battle sequences and these battle sequences are massive, right? Like Return of the King is basically like 45 minutes of like non-stop battle scenes, like
it is.
Basically intercut with other things too. But it's just like, you see the escalation of the battles, right? Like you see like the calm before the storm. Like it's a full story arc within the battle scenes themselves that keeps them compelling. Like you see like the quiet, and you see like the ambush. You see you see the arc of our heroes losing a little bit and then coming back, and it's triumphant, and it feels like a full arc and a full story because there's so much to relate to. And there's obviously a lot of extras and a lot more CGI. This was kind of one of the first early movies to implement like the CGI multiple people kind of stuff. But it still looks amazing, and it looks it looks massive, and it looks unreal and unusually scaled. And even the battles that are at night still look amazing too, because instead of nowadays it's easy for battle sequences, Game of Thrones, to be like really dark, to be really dark and be really hard to see. You know what I mean? But like when the Lord of the Rings did that like really cool thing where it's like all of the lighting's like blue, so it makes it look like kind of washed out at nighttime, but still like kind of lit. So that's a nice touch too. That makes the battle scenes really nice.
I love squinting at my TV and making it hard to see.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, didn't people complain about that?
They
I've
do.
never watched
Yeah, it was a real long night.
I defend that. I heavily defended that. I thought it was incredible. But yeah, Robert, same question to you. The significance of these battles, the fact that people keep going back to watch these movies, a lot of the reason why is because of the battles.
Yeah, the battles are incredible, just filmed in such a unique way, and a lot of it is practical effects, a lot of it is CGI. but the practical effects look so great. And also, the other big thing about battles is in a lot of other fantasy storytelling, not just Game of Thrones, but just really in battles and action movies in general, it's kind of hard. Excuse me, it's very easy to lose track of like where you are, where your characters are, what are you trying to follow, and I think that's something that these battles do very well. You always know where Gandalf is. You always know where Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli are. You always know what you're supposed to be focusing on. So even though it may be this huge wide shot with like 300 extras or CG, 300, you always are focusing on the right spot, and I think that is a real testament to the filmmaking. In the battle sequence are incredible. The Helm's Deep. It's at night. It's raining. You can see everything crystal clear, and it is incredibly beautifully filmed. Same with the big battle at Minas Tirith in the third one, where like there's using like siege weapons and there's like fireballs shooting everywhere, and it's just like this massive, huge scale, huge scope, fighting for like the future of the world, and yet you know exactly where everybody is. You still have the emotion of each individual character. It is intercut with small things, like it's intercut with like a speech from Gandalf to Pippin like about death, and like that's just like a really emotional moment when he's like, oh man, everybody dies, like you'll see white shores, there'll be a green grassy field, like oh man, you're gonna love it. Like it's intercut with these very small moments from those great characters, and I think that's what makes the battles unique for me. Not just the great filmmaking on display, but also the great storytelling. Those characters within those battles, you still see, what they're fighting for on their faces in every single frame.
Yeah, and it definitely hold up for sure. Before we take off, I want to go to you, Sabrina. As far as watching this through your perspective, through your eyes, was there any female characters that stood out for you?
Yes.
And obviously, I want to give you the chance to speak on that.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually, it basically lends itself to what Robert Parker was saying when he was talking about the battles, because that final battle, the entire time, her name is Eowyn. I'm pronouncing that correctly, right?
Yeah, you nailed it.
Absolutely incredible just throughout that entire battle sequence, and exactly what they said, when it's shot, you know where the characters are, you see what they're going through, you see their struggle, all of them, and when it cuts, it doesn't feel, it's like this contained like epicness. It's not just like on this grand scale, even though it is at parts, they're able to also contain it and keep it focused on the characters and what's really important. So Eowyn in that last battle, when she's like, I'm no man, and woo, that was absolutely incredible. I was so hyped. That was probably my favorite part entire trilogy, honestly. So she stood out the most. I just loved seeing her on screen. I loved her character. I loved everything about it. And she was just strong and vibrant and very rich. And was definitely disappointed by Liv Tyler's character. Just because I just didn't think there was anything.
She just comes and goes. There's just not a lot that happens with that character in general. And also, like, Liv Tyler just isn't great in these movies, not gonna lie.
Oh, dang. Shots fired. Where's Armageddon, bro? Don't want to close my eyes.
I don't hate Armageddon. I don't hate Liv Tyler. She's just not the right choice for this character.
Yeah.
It was funny in the movie, in one of the films, I think it might have been the second or third, she's like, I'm going to take him to, or I'm going to bring this to my father. And I'm like, Steven Tyler?
Uh-huh.
Keep popping in?
He comes in.
Exactly. He's just hanging out with the elves,
Well, what about now Cate Blanchett's character? I might need some help here with
Galadriel.
Galadriel.
Whoa.
There you
Slow
go.
down.
Slow
What?
down. Future
What?
slow down.
First
Yeah.
round coming up? What?
I just have the
Hey.
biggest... I have the biggest crush on Cate Blanchett, so I'm like... I really liked her character as well. She just didn't stand out as much. I didn't think she had as strong of moments as Eowyn did, so that's kind of what I came out by the end of the film, with still Eowyn in my mind throughout this entire one.
And it's a great moment, too. I mean, I think it's become an iconic moment in just cinema in general. Not even just fantasy movies. Obviously, Robert Parker, we could go on forever. I want to thank you so much for coming on, man. This was a lot of fun. I think we got through some stuff that might be different than a usual Lord of the Rings review. So I thought this was a good episode overall. So we appreciate you coming on, man, honestly.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much, seriously, for having me on. This was my absolute pleasure for me. Thank you very much.
One day we got to have you back so we can actually talk about the movies.
Yeah.
Hey, we did. Don't insult me.
You don't want to do that. I could do that for literally 20 hours, so don't tempt me.
But I feel like we got through some themes and stuff that maybe other YouTube channels don't talk about.
Absolutely,
if I'm being honest.
We did it the meaning of way. We did it the meaning of
we did it
way.
the right way. Our way.
Our
either
Hobbit way.
Yeah, exactly.
As a
or
team.
Or man way, or human way.
Okay.
There it
No,
is.
I meant like humanity. You know what I
I
meant.
know, I'm kidding.
We gotta do it like the elves
man.
now. You know what I mean? Like with the we gotta do it for
or like the
for-
wizards next time.
Oh, yeah.
Either
Exactly.
way, Robert Parker, where can everyone find you?
You can find me personally on Twitter and Letterboxd at RBRTPRKR98. That is my first and last name without vowels plus a year. And that's about it.
Yeah, man. Either way, I'll say it now just because we're finished. After my teammates went out, I was rooting for you, bro. I was rooting for you to go all the way.
Thank you,
honestly.
man.
But either way, good job. I still think you should be up there for Rookie of the Year.
Hey,
Just
your
on the basis
Star
of
Wars
alone
one was incredible, man.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, but just like Rookie of the Year, Robert Parker, reason why destroyed me. Underneath it just say the destruction of
take
Ace
it.
of
Yeah.
Star Wars
Was it one of the
champion.
questions?
Ace.
Was it one of the questions in the first round? Actually, she whatever
loved, the spider.
Yeah,
the
the spider.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I remembered that when I saw it on screen.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Any Lord of the Rings question I got at the Schmodown. You could tell by my knowledge on this episode.
No,
was
man,
like,
you were
what?
great. You were great.
But either way, when I become Star Wars champion,
Yeah.
Right?
Thank
When
you
I
for saying
become-
it when. That's the correct way to say that sentence.
when I
There you
become
go.
Star Wars champion,
There you go.
You're gonna have that in the record books as having
Yeah.
destroyed this Star Wars champion. But either way, man, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
RB3, where can everyone find you?
Find me on Twitter and Instagram at DirectorRB3.
Sabrina.
Twitter and Instagram at Sabrina X Monica, and then Twitter as well at Sabrina on Film.
Yeah, and you have another Patreon live, right?
I had one last night. We did, Monday night. We did a Cats watch along live stream. That was so much fun.
There you go.
So much fun.
time.
God, that movie was absolutely ridiculous, but Ian McKellen was in that as well and also killed it. So also connects to this episode.
there you
A lot
go.
of Ian McKellen the past few.
Love it.
Alrighty, guys, you can find me at Squad Leader Race and obviously us at First Cut TML. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. That's the best way you can support us. Hashtag support the homies. For the Meaning Of Podcast, I'm Andres.
This is RB3.
I'm Sabrina.
And that's Robert Parker. And we're peacing out, guys. Peace.